Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Lenten Journey, Companions Along the Way. I'm Patty Ames, Canon for Christian Formation, and I'll be walking with you and our guest as we continue our journey through Lent. I have invited another friend to join us to share our stories of faith, about Lent, those who walk with us, some wondering, and we'll pray together. I'm beginning each session of this series with some silence and then a poem to help us focus on our Lenten journey and connect with our guests this evening. So I invite you to take a moment to take a deep breath and still yourselves as we begin with a poem by Anne Weems from her book, Kneeling in Jerusalem. Lent. Lent is a time to take the time, to let the power of our faith story take hold of us, a time to let the events get up and walk around in us, a time to intensify our living unto Christ, a time to hover over the thoughts of our hearts, a time to place our feet in the streets of Jerusalem, or to walk along the sea and listen to his word, a time to touch his robe and feel the healing surge through us, a time to ponder and a time to wonder. Lent is a time to allow a fresh new taste of God. Tonight, I have the privilege and pleasure of welcoming Dr. Sally Thomas. That's hard for me to say. I know Sally is Sally Hoff, but her married name is Sally Thomas. Sally and I met at Camp Allegheny in West Virginia when we were 15 years old, just a few short years ago, and have been friends ever since. She completed her Doctor of Ministry at Eden Seminary in St. Louis in 2022 and has moved recently to Freeport, Maine, where she lives with her husband, Bill. Her doctoral research focused on how sharing stories, even the most simple, enhance our connectedness to one another. Sally has been a godly play trainer and sitting in circles with children and their families using godly play for over 20 years. She also is a RN and has been a nurse practitioner and is serving as a chaplain. Sally, thank you for being with us tonight.
I'm just laughing because it doesn't seem like you and I should have this professional conversation, but thank you for the invitation. And I just want to echo what I saw in the chat about the harp music. What a lovely way to ground and get started. So thank you to whose ever gift that was, because it was gorgeous.
That is Susan Carroll, and she is with us on this evening. She is a harpist and shares her gift of music both at her church, St. Paul's here in Lynchburg. That's where I am tonight, as well as taking her music ministry to various places, including Westminster, Canterbury, and serving people with that gift of music. So it is a great way to center ourselves this evening.
Yeah.
And Sally, it's great to have you here. Sally and I have stayed in touch since we worked together at camp and have known each other. And to me, it's one of those relationships where we don't see each other frequently. Sally and her family have traveled across the country at various times, living in different spots. But we've always stayed in touch. And even though the calls or seeing each other have not been frequent, to me, it's a gift to have friends where no matter when you pick up the phone or see each other, you just pick right back up. And I would say we don't always know all of each other's stories. And so I'm looking forward to hearing part of that tonight. And Sally, as we begin, I would just invite you to share a bit of your life narrative and part of your spiritual journey with us.
I'm happy to. It's something I wish we had time to hear from everyone, because it's important to stay connected that way. But um, let me offer a bit of mine just to get us connected. I am fascinated by how at a young age I had an experience of the God in nature, the God of everyone and everything, of that blue sky God, and what a gift that was. And then I also our you mentioned that my family, my grown-up family, my husband and children, we've moved to quite a bit, I think to 5 places around the country. But when we were a little girl, because the family story often repeats itself, we moved 5 or 6 times before I was 7. And when I was 7, my parents were thrilled. I was the oldest of 3 daughters, and they said, "We are going to move to Baltimore." Now, to me, Baltimore could have been anywhere because I didn't know what Baltimore was, but that was their home. That was where they had come from. And my dad sold power tools for Black & Decker, which was based there. So in the middle of 7th grade, I left my classroom in New Jersey at over Christmas vacation, and found myself landed in a new school where I had learned to write handwriting, printing, and everybody else was writing cursive, where there were 26 desks and they needed to shovel in a 27th for me, where there were no pink ballet shoes for after school ballet practice, so I wore black ones, and I was lost. And I don't remember going to church too much until we got there, but it was time to go back to church, the Episcopal Church of the Good Shepherd. My dad had grown up in that church, and we were now back in town, and I am about to turn 60. So this may ring familiar to certain people. Put on my little white gloves and my black patent leather shoes. And I got to go with my dad. My little sister stayed at home to church, whatever that was. And he held my hand and took me in, and I don't remember much about it. It was all sort of confusing. He introduced me to some friends. I'd been taught to shake hands and curtsy, and I performed well. And then he took me down the stairs to the musty smelling basement where historically many Sunday school classrooms have been. And he said, "Here's the 1st grade classroom. This is where you're going to be." And I thought, wait, what? I had you all to myself. I didn't know you were going to leave me in another new classroom with a whole bunch of new people. I remember this as if it were yesterday. And then the door opened to the classroom, and the teacher, and I wish I remember her name, got down on her knees, and she looked at me in the eye, right at eye level, and she said, "You must be Sally. We've been waiting for you. Come on in." And I think that is sort of crystallizes the fact that I felt at home at church. And over time, I started to understand that the God people talked about in church and Jesus was the same God I was experiencing with blue skies and getting to swing really high and all that. And I think if we as grownups are doing our job well, we are offering ways, whether it's languages or stories, to bridge that gap. But that's sort of my foundational story of how I made it to church. Then, I grew up and all sorts of stuff happened. You and I shared an Episcopal experience in an Episcopal church. We sang hymns every day. Those hymns are in my heart because we repeated them ritually. We had chapel every morning, and we worshiped on Sundays. And so the value of ritual seems to be key. Like, I'm so grateful for that. And then I think 2 other touch points are sort of coming up for me. One is I realize I may be a stranger in a strange land because I'm a graduate of the nursing school at the University of Virginia. And I know I'm in a different part of Virginia there, but I got my first job out of school at the Children's Hospital in Boston, and I worked nights on an adolescent oncology floor, a job that I loved and wanted and was unprepared emotionally for. And there was a quiet little chapel on the first floor of the hospital. And I would go in every night before my shift started at about 10:15 and sit. And every morning before I left, I would go into that chapel and sit. I didn't have any prayers available to me. I mean, I don't remember praying. I just remember giving thanks that I took good care of everybody and no one got hurt on the nights things went well. And finally, I think worth mentioning is my husband and I, and my husband was in the same confirmation class I was at this Church of the Good Shepherd. So I've known him a long time. We were both in 7th grade. And but we have 2 daughters who are now grown, but we had 2 little girls. I was working full-time as a nurse practitioner at Mass General Hospital, and we had taken the girls to church. Of course, it was a de rigueur to be a parent and volunteer as a Sunday school teacher. And when I tell you that all that I remember was that the glitter flew, like it was a hot mess every Sunday. Like, I don't know what was happening, but I couldn't, my friend and I, we couldn't quite figure out how to make something meaningful happen. And so she said, I guess the rector said, I want you to go to this workshop. It's just a morning. It's about an hour away. And I don't know about most people, but I was working full time. My husband was traveling. One child was nursing. The other one was in diapers. And the last thing I wanted to do was be gone for most of a Saturday. But we went, and we went to this workshop by this kind of older hippie, Jerome Berryman, and his modality of godly play. And he sat on the floor, and we were encouraged to sit on the floor in a circle around him. And he told this parable, kind of a amalgam of the Good Shepherd narratives in the New Testament and the 23rd Psalm. And then he looked up and he started asking questions. He said things like, I wonder if you've ever been lost. And he let the question sit there. No one said anything. I wonder if you've ever been lost. And it was full. But I didn't venture to say anything. It was not a rhetorical question. Some people were commenting, some weren't. I was just sort of holding it because what was going on was so different than glitter flying. And then after everybody finished sort of talking about that question, he very intentionally waited another few seconds and he said, I wonder if you've ever been found. And all of a sudden, tears were coming down my face. And I didn't know why. But that juxtaposed with glitter flying seemed like I had to know more. And so that was the beginning of my journey with godly play, which took me, to spiritual direction and seminary and yada, yada, yada.
That's good, yada, yada, yada. And thank you so much for sharing those touchstones. Can you talk a little bit more for those that may not be familiar with godly play about what godly play is?
Sure. And you all just hosted a training in Roanoke, the diocese did, and it was hugely successful. So congratulations. So godly play is one of many wonderful ways to offer the gospel to children. And it's based on the idea that we learn best by hearing the stories of our faith, and that when we offer them without a hierarchy, sort of when we share them without any expectation that the children will parrot back the right answers, sort of this Montessori approach that the children learn as they're ready to learn. then after stories get told in this way, we wonder about them together. And there are no right or wrong answers. And we just sort of lay out a story very simply, and then say something like, I wonder what part was your favorite, or I wonder what part felt most important, and then we sort of have these questions that help us unpack it together. And there's no expectation that you'll have it all right or have it all wrong, but the wondering actually continues when the children are invited after that to go pick up something called work. So they can pick one of the many sets of story materials off the shelf, or they can choose to sit in the meditation corner, or they can work with art materials, but they have time to integrate. And what's pretty countercultural about it now is it's quiet. And I don't know if you've noticed, but most of the children in our world are rarely quiet. And a lot of times when they're new to this, it can be a little threatening. What am I supposed to do? Why is it, what? But they pick right up and then get fiercely protective about the quiet. And then it's kind of, if it sounds like it's churchy, it is, because the children sort of create their own sanctuary, and the adults are invited guests to whatever goes on. So that's a little bit about classic godly play. Now we use godly play on Zoom. I actually work as a chaplain in a retirement community and offer godly play to my cognitively impaired circle, my independent living circle, people in the nursing care, and it works similarly. We look at the word together, whatever it is, and we unpack it together by wondering about it. And the conversation is rich at any age. Yeah.
It is indeed. Thank you. You've told us some bits of your journey, and what I have done in this series is invited people that have been companions on my faith journey to share, as you have tonight, some of your faith story. But I would be interested to know, who are some of those people that have walked with you at various times in your life and faith journey?
I start with my dad, and I think about our camp director, Cooper Dawson, and all the people. I think summer camp, in whatever shape it takes, if I had a prayer, it would be something that every child could experience. But we had some wonderful role models who were just a couple years older than us, but they helped us be our best selves, didn't they?
They did.
And then once we integrated that, we could be really good friends to each other. And then we could model that for other people.
Yeah.
When we weren't getting in trouble, but we didn't get in that much trouble. So
at least not that we're going to talk about tonight.
That's right. It's not on the table. I'm gonna offer this very short story. When I was working for a church when we lived in California about 25 years ago, we had a new rector who was a second career priest and had come out of the world. He had been an opera singer, and we were sitting in a staff meeting one day, and the music he was choosing to share with children in church was all from Sesame Street. And I asked the question that maybe I shouldn't have asked, but I wondered, don't children deserve sacred music too? So now, you all know more about me than I want you to, because sometimes I crossed a line. And he slammed his fist on the table and said, we are going to play whatever music I want because I'm a number 8 on the Enneagram, and that's the way it works. So I didn't know what the Enneagram was. And I went to the deacon and I said, that was just, I don't know what's happening. She had been in this meeting and she said, I think you need a spiritual director. I think if you're going to do this work, you need a spiritual director. And that priest and I ended up figuring things out and learning a lot about each other. And that story has a happy ending. But in 2003, on her recommendation, I met a spiritual director who was outside of the Episcopal Church, who was steeped in Ignatian, the spirituality of Saint Ignatius of Loyola. And she is still my spiritual director 20 years later, thanks to Zoom and we've moved a lot, but she hasn't, thank goodness. And so she has listened carefully with me for how God is moving, and sometimes poked and sometimes prodded and sometimes held and sometimes cried. But her name's Maria, and I lift her up because she has witnessed the could I, should I, am I supposed to be doing God's work? What's that mean? And she always gives me some really interesting language. At our last meeting, just even a couple of weeks ago, like many of you, I bet, we're all sort of sensitive to, I mean, not too sensitive, I'm getting tears. The world's falling apart. It feels like the world's burning in certain places. Maybe I'm sure you feel it too. And I said, I don't know how to hold it all. I don't know how to pray. I can't, I am lost. I mean, it was a real sort of on my knees moment. And she said simply something that helped me. So I offer it here because maybe it'll help you. She said, Sally, our hearts and minds have the capability to hold the needs and the cares of a village, not of the whole world. And so choose your village and give that your attention and care, because you cannot meet the needs of the whole world. And I'm not sure exactly what I mean by sharing that, except it really helped me see or re-understand or learn that lesson yet again, that God was not asking me to do it all by myself and have it all figured out, and that we all really were swamped, and we are called, our sensibilities are enough to care for a village together, but maybe not fix it all.
It's so true. And thank you for bringing up spiritual directors. Last week, our guest was Lisa Kimball, and she talked about that as well. And I've experienced it. I'm sure others might have as well on the Zoom tonight. And it's a powerful relationship and so helpful as part of the journey, that we're not doing it by ourselves. And so you brought up Maria and some others that you serve as a chaplain. Who else are some of the people you're walking with
Well,
in their faith journey?
I need to raise the roof for Lisa Kimball. She and I are not friends as you are, but when I lived in California and had was on this path of work, beginning to work in churches and stuff, she had just finished her doctoral dissertation. Mm-hmm. And was in the sort of Bay Area where I was, and was very gracious. She spoke a lot, and as you know, she's a great advocate for the work of engaged lay people in the church. And I went to hear her speak. It was sort of a day-long conference, and she did a workshop on godparenting. That's what her doctoral dissertation had been about. And I was a new godparent for the first time. And she said things like, you're responsible every day to pray for that child. You're responsible not to, you're invited to help their parents be better parents, to walk alongside them. This isn't something where you show up at the baptism, the confirmation, and the wedding. And she had all sorts of insights that made me realize what we're really called to do as the body of Christ together, without having to wear a collar necessarily. And not only that, the way she was modeling it was an invitation for everybody else to go out and do whatever they're called to do too. And so you and I were just a couple months ago at Forma at VTS, and there she was, and I was giving a little workshop, and she was the host in the room. It was sort of like, this is going to sound crazy, but it was sort of like, when Jesus says, baptize me, and John the Baptizer says, are you kidding? I can't baptize you're you. And that's sort of how I felt with Lisa Kimball. Like, what are you doing in this room? Like, you're the one who got me started on all this. So
But we're all in it together.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's what's great.
yeah, yeah.
And in formation.
Yeah.
So as you've told part of your story, I'm going to take us into Lent and invite you to share how you walk through Lent. Are there things you do or don't do? And what practices or not? How do you walk through Lent?
Thank you for asking. And this is where I wish we were all sitting in the same room together and we could really hear one another. Lent every year is intentional at the beginning, and I always seem to lose my way and then get it back by Palm Sunday. Two practices this year I feel are particularly vibrant. One is we're lucky enough to live adjacent to a forest, and I walk for about an hour in the woods every morning. We have a 3-year-old dog, Hoot, and we have about 15 inches of snow on the ground. So sometimes it's snowshoes or cleats, but it's so easy to listen to podcasts or listen to the news. But during Lent, I have nothing in my ears, so I can sort of appreciate the stillness and the crunch and the sounds. And every year I think I should do this all year long, but this is a Lenten practice, and that one I keep up. I have a pile next to my desk you can't see of intentional reading to do, but the one place I found special solace this year is the daily reflection from Richard Rohr is about pilgrimage. My husband and I walked the Camino a few years ago, and we're getting ready to go on pilgrimage with some friends we met there. We're going to walk through Western Scotland in a few months and head to Iona. So I love God's synchronicity and the fact that this is coming as a daily reflection, just a little drip, drip, drip of anticipating pilgrimage and being a pilgrim and abandonment is sort of a little bit of something I savor every day. It's a little bit of delight. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not even going to tell you what's in the pile because I haven't. I have picked up several, but have not finished any. So
that's fine. And for those of you all joining us on the Zoom tonight, and for everyone that registered, I will send a follow-up email tomorrow with any resources. So I will put that in there. And Sally, if there are any other resources that you want to email me later that you think of, I'll send an email out tomorrow to share some of those or all of those with the folks tomorrow. But the practice I'd like to invite you to talk about and let me know when you want me to put up the slide is your doctoral work and your research and story sharing led you to create the Wondering Together project. And I'd love for you to talk about that and share that with us.
Great. So let me tell you a little bit about the Wondering Together project's origin story, a couple minutes. And then it's actually a daily reflection practice. Many people are using it for Lent, and we'll do it together. It's short, and then we can sort of go up together to the balcony and talk about how that was. But we talked a little bit about godly play and said sometimes we wonder together. And there's this series of wondering questions that we use most of the time, but not all the time. But they have been really helpful. They are the same questions almost each time. The children come to expect them. The order that they follow is almost like little breadcrumbs that draw you deeper. So we ask them in a certain order, almost like theological reflection, if you know EFM, that kind of opens you up along the way. And so I've been sitting in these circles and teaching adults how to do this. And And I was sitting in the back of the church I was working in Denver at the time. And it was that special time at church. Not every church does things differently, but the children were coming up from Godly Play or for Sunday school, and parents were going to the nursery to pick up their children. And it was almost time for the Eucharist. So families were starting to gather together in worship. 10, 15 years before that, children would want to sit with their friends, or they'd be on the floor coloring, or whatever was the culture in the church. But it hit me as I stood in the back and just gazed upon kind of back of our parish at work, that children, and maybe you've noticed this too, children wanted to snuggle up to their parents. The pews looked to me like litters of puppies sitting together. Families wanted to be together. And it wasn't the first time I noticed it, but it was the first time I wondered about that. And at the time, our daughters were in their mid-20s. And I started to think about how smart children are and how great their antennae are for thinking about getting what they need. And what I realized after watching this with more intention week after week was that children and their parents, by extension, were hungry to be together unplugged, without a phone or a screen on. And that just being together, there was something in that connection that they were hungry for. And so I wondered about that. And as Patty told you, our family moved again. So now I'm in St. Louis. And I thought, what's happening with now that phones and digital screens are happening? And I'd heard one family use this term, and maybe you've heard it too, but when they pick up their children from one activity to another, they're going to snack them. And I thought, smack them? And they're like, no, snack them. It's when we have snacks in the front seat of the car and we give them to them because we're so busy going from place to place to place. I had certainly snacked my children too. I just didn't have that word for it. But I realized just how busy life was going for families. It had gone that fast for when we had our children. I just didn't realize it. So what started to dwell in me was, I wonder with the advent of screens, how families are doing telling the stories we used to tell. As you can tell, I always seem to tell stories, but stories, as the nurse in me, stories in our brain go to different places. The church is really, really smart by having a 3-year lectionary cycle, because when you hear stories over and over again, they go into different parts of your brain and they become more accessible for ethical and moral decision making. It's called the compression effect. And people are talking about this all the time. But my question was, who's telling children stories? Do they know the story about the time Aunt Hazel lost her tooth? Or do they know the story, the stories of our faith? Do they know about Jesus? Or, because it felt like parents just didn't have time. They're working full time and there's just a lot going on. So finally, I made it to graduate school and got into this doctoral program, and wanted to look at how families tell stories. My thesis was, if families come together to check in or tell little stories 5 minutes a day using kind of a easy practice, will that help them lay down foundational stories so that when things get rough, when somebody wins the lottery or someone dies or the dog dies or there's a break, will that give them a set of established tools to talk about and be together in the hard stuff? That was the thesis of this research. And the way I researched it was to make it a secular project. I wanted to study families who I didn't check if they were families of faith or not. I wondered if this practice would work for the world. I'd been doing a lot of volunteer work in the public schools in St. Louis, and families, all children are at risk. And so what it looked like was 12 families, all different kinds, some with children from the foster care system. One family had a set of twins that were 1 year old. Some had teenagers, some had tweens, some had adult children living at home. One family was two 80-year-olds. Tried the practice, and I checked in with them every week, and we talked about how it was working. And I started to collect data to see if this was really working. And it was. So that's how the Wondering Together practice was born. And why I bring it to you today, because it's really low-hanging fruit, and it's something that maybe you can take to grandchildren or to your book club or to your vestry meeting, to things you do once a week. Before we do it, I'll just mention during COVID, someone who sees me for spiritual direction lives in a retirement community in Denver. And with the quarantine, everybody was in their rooms. They couldn't leave. So she took the Wondering Together questions, which we'll do, and she paired people up to call each other at night and to check in and have this ritual as a way to unpack their day. So this isn't just for families with children. But you know what, Patty? I'm going to share my screen because I think I have two good slides, and I think I only sent you one. Is that okay with you?
That is great.
Just
Go
one
right
second.
ahead.
Okay, everybody pray, because this usually goes okay. But
And I will say while Sally is going to share the screen, I do the practice at home by myself at night. And I've talked with others, and we do it some, but for myself, it has become a practice I end my day with.
thank you. So as we look at the questions, if you're familiar with Ignatian spirituality, you might recognize elements of the examen, and we can talk about that. So this is the artifact. I'm going to offer it to you in better form so it's easier to read. But every family got it's basically a coaster. Here's mine. But it's got these questions on it. And some families would light a candle. Other families would, so one family did this practice while they drove to school in the morning, so it didn't have to be done at night. One family did it while they brushed their teeth at night because it was the only time they were together. So, so these are how the questions were delivered to folks, but it wasn't, it just because it was a way, kind of a touchstone that they could put on the dining room table or somewhere like that. And I've got plenty of them. I'm happy to share if you'd like any of them. But here are the questions. And I'm going to tell you how I offered them to the families, and then we can do the practice together. So I said to families, the practice takes about 5 minutes a day. I'm going to invite you to put your phones aside and put them on silent, just for 5 minutes. And take a deep breath together, or get ready, and trust that you never have to share if you don't want to. But this is a way to just check in with one another. So one family member would ask the question, and they would say, I wonder what part of today you liked the best. And everybody who was present, 1 to 5 or 6 people, would answer with a word or a phrase or a short story. And the deal was that no one else in the circle could fix it or comment on it or judge it. The practice was to hold it together. And when everybody had a chance, whoever was asking the questions that evening, let's say, would ask the second question. I wonder what part of today was the most important part for you. So it's a little bit different, favorite and most important part. And then the question continued to, I wonder what part of today you felt most alive. Now, for families with little teeny children, toddlers, we swapped out the language to say, I wonder when you had the most energy today. And some families recognized the practice and wanted to add God language, which was A-okay with me. So I wonder what part of today you felt closest to God, or you felt God was closest to you. So maybe you can start to see that, like those breadcrumbs I mentioned, you're starting to unpack your day in a way that's very intentional. The fourth question, I wonder what part of today you would have liked to leave out. And sometimes when I present to people, they're like, that's a hard question. Why is that in there? But it's a really important question, because that's the real world, not all rainbows. And what we found with this question was that children really wanted to know a little bit about what life was like for their parents when they weren't together. And this question was helpful. Doesn't mean parents had to be brutally honest, but they were honest. And children got a fuller sense of what their parents did and where they went. And finally, and for any of you who work in therapy or medical practice, you'll recognize, or teachers especially, I wonder how you're feeling in this moment. This is the practice called affect naming. And we know that when you name an emotion, that your stress hormone cortisol goes way down. You'll hear some teachers say, naming the emotion tames the emotion, but it's a nice, one of the research participants said, it's like a nice little button to put on the end of your day. So I am going to invite us to do this practice together. And what I would like to invite you to do, and again, you're not going to have to share anything you don't want, but for just about a minute in silence, you can put your head down or turn your screen off or just stay present. I want you to review your day. Kind of watch it like a movie, just for about a minute, from the moment that you knew you were waking up in your bed to where you are now. And just for a minute, and I'll keep the time, watch the day unfold, just so you can have some time to appreciate what your day's been like. So I'll be quiet while you take this minute. So it's been about a minute. That might have been too long or too short, and that's okay. We're just getting a taste of this. But I'm going to invite you, whether you have a piece of paper or pencil, Patty, maybe you and I can model this, but I'm just going to invite everybody just to, in their own mind's eye, answer that first question. I wonder what part of today you liked the best. And Patty, I wonder what part of today you liked the best. Hope you're muted.
The part I like the best is when I started the Zoom and your face came on the Zoom, to see my dear friend.
Oh, my
Sally.
favorite. Yep. Oops. Can you hear me?
Yep.
My favorite part of the day for me was seeing your name in my email a lot. And that was just a reconnection, sort of an anticipatory connection. Friends, if you have any questions while we're doing this, feel free to put them in the chat. But the next question I invite you to think about just for yourself is, I wonder what part of today was the most important part of your day, for whatever reason. I wonder what part of today was the most important part. Patty, what was the most important part of your day?
I think it was, I had driven home. I was working in Roanoke today, came back to Lynchburg where I live, and was rushing around, took the dog for a quick walk, but stopped to talk to a neighbor, and they had something going on. And so it was important to stop and listen.
My most important part was similar. One of the units at my place of work is in quarantine, and I am not allowed in. And some of the pastoral care I offer, I just haven't been able to do that personal thing, and phones are funny. And anyway, I got through to someone I've been trying to get in touch with, and the conversation was rich. And I threw all chaplain rules to the wind when I said to him, you are loved. He said, you love me. I said, I love you. And he just turned 91. So it was the most important part of my day for sure. Oops. This is what happens when I play with. The third question, I wonder when you felt most alive today, or had the most energy, or felt most closest to God. Take a moment, friends, and just sort of take whatever comes up and notice. Patty, how does that question work for you? What are you thinking?
I am thinking 6 a.m. I had gotten up earlier, but was out at 6 a.m. walking the dog. It was just starting to get a little light. The incredible moon was out, and I too walk unplugged, and hearing birds chirp and just being present to that moment. I felt most alive and close to God.
Oh,
What about you?
I woke up and thought, that is the first good night's sleep I have had in a week. And I was so grateful. And it was such a nice way to start today. So here's the question that some people feel is challenging, and maybe it should be. But give yourself some time just to say to yourself, I wonder what part of today you would have liked to have left out and still have all the day that you needed. Patty, how about you?
I would like to leave out all the paperwork I had to do today, or busy work for my job.
Yeah.
I enjoy doing other parts of my job, so I prefer to leave that part out.
Yeah, no surprise. I on Mondays are usually a desk. I mean, not Mondays. Monday was a desk day for me, but today got messed up because of the quarantine where I work. So I did a lot of typing, and it's not my favorite thing to do. So I could have left that out. And finally, whatever word or phrase or idea comes up, just take the first one that's offered in response to this question. I wonder how you're feeling in this moment. There's no judgment, but just kind of solidify that in your mind. Patty, how are you feeling, dear one?
Blessed.
Oh, I feel full, grateful and full. So that's the Wondering Together project. That took us about 7 minutes, but before we have time to chat about it, I want to mention just something that we noticed over two or three things that we noticed over time that I want to share with you. One is when you get used to these questions, whether they were adults or children, they would start to notice in their day, oh, this is the thing that I wish I could take out. That's the thing I'm going to say, or this is my favorite part of the day. There was one child in the research who had some issue with another child on the playground. And he said, you are going to be the part of my day I want to leave out. So it's a way to pay attention as you go through your day. The second and last thing I want to lift up, if you choose to try this practice, is the data was really interesting. Our research period was a month long, 4 weeks. And the first and second week, people described acquiring skills, feeling comfortable, feeling that this was important and valuable. We had also, I can show, I might have the graph in here. But the third week, all that went way down. All of a sudden, people were saying, I think this is too hard. I don't think we should do this. I think everybody's getting tired of it. And because we were part of a research study, I said, that is your choice to stop, but I hope you'll try it for a few more days because I'm interested to know what that's about. One of the participants said, I think it's like a muddle, like we've hit a muddle. So I kind of call it the third week muddle. And maybe you've got inklings about this on your own. But what was happening was people were starting to share more deeply. They were used to the practice. It was becoming more meaningful, and they were being more vulnerable. And that's hard. What we also learned was when you stuck it out, by the fourth week, the graph that went like this and then down went way back up again. Oh, we did it. You know, they didn't have the words and say, we got through the muddle, but people had rededicated themselves and said, no, we love it. We're going to keep doing it. And at the end of the Wondering Together project, to a T, every single child who was a tween or a teen, at the final Zoom, all the family members were present, turned to their parents and said, can we please keep doing this? Does this mean we have to stop, is what they'd say. And parents assumed that they would want to stop. But I think being seen and known and listened to is something that we might be taking for granted societally. So I offer that as some impetus that if it gets hard, that's normal. But the value, the research now shows that all these adverse childhood experiences, we've been researching these for the last 15 years, the things that make people at high risk for poverty and for health, for physical health implications because of stressors in childhood. We now have a whole set of research that's important for the church to know. Positive childhood experiences, especially supportive relationships with non-parent adults, someone who sees them, can be a protective factor against these adverse childhood experiences. And so when we as the church, and this is writ large, this may not be true in your diocese, but clutch our pearls and say, but where are the children? Where are the families? What do we do? Our job is to go out and say, I see you. I want to get to know you. I wonder what part of today you like the best, or something similar that helps them, because we are being active in that. One last thing, this is from one of the actual interviews, a young 13-year-old. She said, this is me quoting her, it's really nice to do it at the end of the day before you go to bed, because then you have like if you ask a question like, what would you like to leave out of your day? It's good to kind of like get that off your chest, and then it's easier to go to sleep. What would the world be like if more people, more of us got to get something off of our chest? So I'm going to stop screen sharing. And Patty, is there a way we can just ask people to unmute if they have any questions or want to offer any feedback or ideas?
Yes, you all are welcome to unmute. There's a comment question in the chat. asking so you listen and don't respond.
You listen and don't judge. My answer to that question is my tool in my tool belt is always goes, wow, that sounds important, or that was your favorite, or so that you're not fixing or taking someone's experience away from them by talking on top of it. So, wow, I hear you. That must have been hard. But when we modeled it, Patty, you and I were able to, because we're adults, to keep that back. But yeah, it doesn't mean you have to be detached. That's not what it means.
Does anyone have any questions or comments for Sally?
Well,
give you a minute. That's well, while you're thinking, oh, let's see. Thank you. Sally, last week, and as I was talking with Lisa in planning, we talked about asking questions at the end, different questions to end and have each guest answer the same question. So I'm going to invite you to share 5 words that describe your faith journey.
And God was in that place too. And God was in that place too. I think that's 7.
I'm going to change my answer. So we'll do this. And I invite you all to think about it as well, because those of you that were here last week. So I chose this week, the adventure of a lifetime. I hope lifetime is one word. I don't know. I didn't do that well in English. What's your favorite church word?
Threshold. Threshold. The place where you leave Chronos and enter Kairos, and leave Kairos and enter Chronos, and it's magic there.
I'm going to take grace this week. And as on Ash Wednesday, I spent some time with 7 young men from Boys Home who will be our guests next week. And they, from the ages of 11 to 18, shared part of their faith journey and what they do at Boys Home, which is a residential school in our diocese. When they have the discipleship, they pray, and they use the model of Annie Lamott's book, Thanks, Help, Wow. And so if you'll join me in doing that, what's your thanks today?
Thanks for my husband, Bill.
And I give thanks for everyone that's joined us and wondered. What do you need help with? What's your help?
To find a way to be to be generative in my next decade. Yeah.
I need help cleaning my house. If I'm being completely honest. I walked in today and I was like, really? This is my house. What's your wow today?
We have a 7-month-old grandson. That's all I can say. That's all I can think about.
That's
He's
a
perfect.
Great wow.
Yeah.
My wow is artwork. I know that will sound funny, but I've asked you, I love the art behind you, and I'm going to lean this way. This picture behind me is a painting that someone from Camp Allegheny did, that I sent them that picture, and wow, from 15 years old to this, and these wonderful pieces of art behind us, and that connection. Yeah. So I am so grateful for that, and for your time with us, and for those of you who have been with us this evening, as I'm asking every guest to do as we end, is to pray with us, pray for us. And so I've invited Sally to do that, and I'm going to share my screen, and Sally is going to pray us out this evening.
Thank you. And thanks for everybody being here. And this was the prayer that I said every day during the Wondering Together research. Loving God, I abandon myself into your hands. Do with me what you will. Whatever you may do, I thank you. I am ready for all. I accept all. Let only your will be done in me and in all your creatures. I wish no more than this, O Lord. Into your hands I commend these beloved people and our work together. I offer the participants, the project, and myself with all the love of my heart. For I love you, Lord, and so need to give myself, to surrender myself into your hands without reserve and with boundless confidence, for you are my strength and my hope. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Sally. I am so appreciative for your time, your faith journey, and helping us to wonder with each other. I will share that prayer as part of the resources. Sally is going to send me some of these awesome squares, and I will get those out to you all as well. Next week, we'll be joined by video. I have recorded them. They aren't able to be with us live, but 7 boys, young men from Boys Home, who will be sharing their faith journey with us. And I hope you'll join us then. Until next week, thank you all so much. God bless and good night.